The Ardent Cyclone Sword Special has always been a bit of a meme in the Dauntless community for being a lower DPS and to an extent a bit of an easy mode way of playing the sword and the game in general. It did receive a bit of validation and actually had somewhat of an argument for being used once the sword rework came around, as the developers did a pretty good job at making sure that the specials were fairly balanced in DPS. However, the sword was balanced in the sense that no matter how you used it, it would at least be decent, and if you used it properly, it could be somewhat devastating. So for the Dauntless Trials scene, Ardent Cyclone has been pretty much unused when it comes to solo play, the strategy being favored, usually involving Avenging Overdrive, and in peak performance scenarios, using the Charged Sword Focus mod. And with the nerf to Ardent Cyclone attack speed in the 1.6.4 patch, that is most likely going to remain the case. So I thought I would take the time to document the situation in which the Ardent Cyclone Sword Special was actually relevant in solo Dauntless Trials. Hello everyone, my name is Trevor, I go by TheMrTrails, welcome to the channel. If you enjoy Dauntless and are not subscribed already, consider subscribing to the channel. I post Dauntless content here every week. And head over to the twitch.tv/TheMrTrails, that's where I do the majority of my Dauntless giveaways, as well as where you can get your hands on my Dauntless in-game flare. And I will explain a little bit more later, but this video is actually coming out a week later than I intended it to, and because of that, there has been a change in some of the information that will be in the video. So as far as I can recall or am aware of, using the Ardent Cyclone Sword Special has only been a top 10 solo leaderboard strategy for Dauntless Trials one time before this past month. The first of which coming from the Swordman himself, Solo Burst, who stood alone with his strategy in the top 10 of the Boreas trial, which had the Granny's Heartbreaker tonic. The main reason that the Ardent Cyclone was useful against the Boreas trial is because you can deal damage to Boreas while also dealing damage to the bomber minions that spawn, which are able to stun Boreas for a bit of time when they explode. But this run almost wasn't a top 10 time, as many experienced Dauntless players would consider this to be one of the luckiest Dauntless trial runs in history. The bomber explosions aligned in a nearly perfect way to be able to get the Boreas to be staggered for the majority of the run. And not only that, but after the last of the bombers exploded, the weak spot modifier reappeared on the leg that Solo Burst was focusing, and he was able to use the Ardent Cyclone finisher move to obliterate the rest of Boreas' health. Even with that kind of luck involved, it still wasn't able to beat Strikers, but was able to stick it out in the top 10. And that might have remained the only top 10 Dauntless Trial solo leaderboard time that used the Ardent Cyclone Special. However, funnily enough, in the final days before the attack speed on it got nerfed, the Ardent Cyclone Special got a bit of a going out party. It's not like everyone knew that this nerf was coming and decided to use only that for a meme, but it was actually the most effective option that was able to be found. And it came against perhaps an unlikely opponent, Skarn. If you're a veteran Dauntless player, such as myself, then you might remember the days where the slashing damage type dealt 33% damage against Skarn's armor. But there was some changes to it since then. To find out how this run might have been possible, let's take a look at one of the top times of the week, my own top 5 run against Skarn, which used this strategy. So what exactly happened here that made this the strategy used in the majority of the top 10? And why was a slashing weapon on top? Wouldn't you expect a blunt weapon to be better against Skarn, as it can get rid of the armor faster? Well, a while back there were some changes to how the Skarn armor behaved. The only thing that should be affected by Skarn's armor is part damage, for which the slashing, piercing, and shot type attacks now deal 75% of their part damage to it, but to compensate for that increased part damage, the overall HP of the armor was raised. And all of the weapons should deal the same amount of core damage against the armor, being 100% of their regular damage. However, this isn't exactly the case, as it seems like all of the weapons are affected by some type of hidden core damage reduction that by all accounts of updates and otherwise should not be in the game. So no matter what type of weapon you are playing, you are going to be facing some type of core damage disadvantage when hitting behemoth armor. However, there is something that this core damage reduction doesn't affect, and that's item type damage, and this type of damage for the most part will have a fixed value based on your power difference with the behemoth. The most common source of item type damage is from the lanterns, but there's another source of it that can be made practical, and that's from Cascade. Cascade's damage bonus orbs deal item type damage, and a fair amount of it with each explosion. So to get rid of the armor on Skarn faster, players could opt to run Cascade, and once the armor was off, they'd be dealing the appropriate amount of core damage to Skarn. But with Cascade's randomness and for the most part inconvenience to actually pick up the drops from it, the strategy requires a weapon that is mobile enough to not interrupt its combos in order for it to be the optimal strategy. And that's where Ardent Cyclone came into play. Ardent Cyclone is just a continuous spin of dealing damage, and because of this you have the freedom to roam around the behemoth without having to worry about doing combos. Though the downside of the Ardent Cyclone is that you aren't able to dodge any attacks while you're doing it. However, Cascade comes with something that makes it so you don't have to worry about dodging, and that's the purple invincibility orb. Since you didn't have to worry about dodging, you had the freedom to pick up the damage bonuses from Cascade, and the item type damage from the orbs did the full amount of damage, unlike nearly everything else in the game. All of this accumulated to the use of Ardent Cyclone being the top strategy on the Skarn Dauntless trial. However, there was one other thing that made the strategy as good as it was, and it was the speed snapshot feature of the Ardent Cyclone. The way Ardent Cyclone dealt with attack speed was it would spin at the highest value of your attack speed, and once it got there, it would continue to spin at that speed until it ran out. Thanks to the use of the Embermane Lantern, the Cyclone was able to reach a fast attack speed quickly, and it would stay at that speed. With too much attack speed, however, the Ardent Cyclone would stop dealing damage, but this was actually resolved by removing a Wild Frenzy cell from the build and slotting in another Berserker in order to deal more damage per hit while also still attacking rather fast. And this was the final push that made the perfect storm of a situation to have the Ardent Cyclone be meta on the Skarn Dauntless trial. And it's almost as if the Dauntless developers knew that this perfect storm of situational benefit for the Ardent Cyclone special was coming, as there was an update that would be releasing at the end of the Skarn Dauntless trial. Since I have a bit of a behind the scenes knowledge, I do know for a fact that the outcome of the Skarn trial did not influence the developers to make this change, because they have to have the specifics of the update in order well before it actually releases. Once the Skarn trial concluded, in the game update that was available, the Ardent Cyclone special would no longer change speeds with any attack speed increases and would spin at a fixed rate. Ardent Cyclone finally saw its time in the spotlight, atop the peak of the Dauntless trial solo leaderboards, eventually making up 8 of the 10 top spots on the leaderboard and all 5 of the top 5 spots. To be fair, each of the players in the top 5 were no strangers to Dauntless trials, each of them being atop the solo leaderboard multiple times throughout their journey in the game, and doing it with a variety of weapons. As I said before, the Ardent Cyclone special was always a meme strategy, and if you would have asked these players weeks or even a few days leading up to the Skarn trial if the Ardent Cyclone would ever be the #1 strategy in a Dauntless trial, their answer would have probably been along the lines of maybe if there was a bug that made it overpowered. And I guess technically that's what happened. An apparent bug with Skarn's armor is limiting the core damage that can be dealt to the behemoth, and that seems to have made Ardent Cyclone overpowered. But it was the full sum of all of those situations coming together that propelled Ardent Cyclone to the top of of the Dauntless Trial solo leaderboard. And with the change of how attack speed affected the Ardent Cyclone special, it's possible we may not ever see Ardent Cyclone being at the top of the solo leaderboards again. And this would be just the second and final glimpse of glory that the Ardent Cyclone might ever see in the game of Dauntless. Wait, what was that? No way. You're telling me that Texas Ranger placed #1 with the strategy the very next week? How is that even possible? Well, Ardent Cyclone against Pangar had an alternative reason for being a solid option. The 1.6.3 update brought us one of the more interesting cells of all time, Pulse. Every few hits, depending on the strength you have of the cell, it would give you a guaranteed critical hit. And guaranteed critical hits is something we haven't seen in the game before, at least in this high of a quantity that you could put onto your build. And it wasn't a secret, even for those of us who tested the Pulse cell before it came out, that it would be rather good when paired with the Hellion Unique effect. The Hellion Unique effect works in a very similar way with Pulse, and if you could align the effects so that every hit of the Hellion Unique effect would be a critical hit, this would skyrocket your DPS. But since most everything else in the game doesn't have this sort of mechanic to it, Pulse is just an average cell in most other situations. It might see a bit more legitimate play when the Omni Cells feature releases, but we will have to see. However, the top of the solo leaderboard against Pangar was pretty much the Hellion weapons that were able to gain the most benefit out of Pulse. The Warpike was in 8 out of the top 10 spots, and Strikers, which actually did get a change made to how Pulse worked to make it work practically for the weapon, filled another spot. But all alone, at the top of the board was an Ardent Cyclone sword run from Texas Ranger. And it does make sense. Ardent Cyclone sword was one of the key strategies that the Pulse cell highlighted, as it generates a lot of hits in a short amount of time, even with the attack speed nerf. But can we expect it to happen again? Will Ardent Cyclone ever be on top of the solo Dauntless Trial leaderboard again? Well, I don't want to make any bold claims like this will never be on top of the Dauntless Trial leaderboard ever again, because I was about to say that before this Pangar trial happened. I've been writing the script for this video since I think the first day of the Pangar trial, and I was rather confident that Skarn would be the second and the final time that Ardent Cyclone was on the top 10 of the solo leaderboard, and I was going to state in this video that because of the attack speed nerf, it would never be the meta strategy of a solo trial again. And I kinda dodged a bullet, it seems, as if this video did release a couple days after the Skarn trial like I initially intended it to, Texas getting #1 with it the next week would have probably been one of the biggest memes the Dauntless community would have ever seen. However, we do have a glimpse at what Ardent Cyclone might be capable of in the future. Cascade is a big reason behind why this strategy worked for the past 2 weeks, and with the proposed changes to lanterns that we saw in a recent Dauntless experimental test, the future of Cascade isn't looking very good. Without the ability to spam your lantern hold to get access to all of the buffs, it's far less likely that you would be able to get the proper RNG for this strategy to work. With that in place, this strategy would likely be put back on the shelf unless it were to receive a buff sometime down the line. But no matter what changes are made to the game going forward, the Ardent Cyclone special will at the very least have a portion of dominance in the history books of Dauntless Trials, and it will forever have these moments where the meme became the meta. Thank you guys for watching. If you enjoyed, consider leaving a like on the video. And if you enjoyed Dauntless and are not subscribed already, consider subscribing to the channel. I post Dauntless content here every week to stay up to date with my content both here on YouTube and on Twitch, as well as to keep up with any potential giveaways I'll be doing. Join the Discord server in the description. I manually make a post whenever I do anything content or giveaway related. I have been Trevor, I go by TheMrTrails, and I will catch you guys next time.